Greetings to all in the love and light of the one infinite creator. My name is Jonathan Tong, and I am facilitator for the Seattle Law of One Study Group. We can be found on the L&L Research website page in their list of study groups. That's llresearch.org. We can also be found on Facebook if you search for the Seattle Law of One Study Group. We do meet on Zoom on Tuesdays from 3:30 to 5 Pacific Standard Time. You don't have to live in the Seattle area to join the Zoomcast or to join this group. Anyone who's available online at that time is always welcome to join us. Today, we are lucky and blessed to have Jim McCarty joining us again for some informal conversation and some questions and answers about the Law of One and how to apply it in our daily lives. How are you doing today, Jim?
Doing well. It's a beautiful spring day here in Louisville, Kentucky.
Full bloom?
Full bloom, indeed. Right outside my window, I have about 10 or 12 lilac bushes in full bloom. They are beautiful and they smell wonderful.
Oh, that's such a delight. Yes, spring is still emerging, I think, in the Pacific Northwest. We've still got leaf buds that are yet to open, but it's always a joy to see. Hey, I did want to ask you a question or two about the Law of One as it applies to gardening. I remember we had a conversation back in January, I believe, where we were talking a little bit about gardening. You mentioned a little bit about the nature spirits that you talk to and work with in your gardening. You mentioned that the best fertilizer is love, and that the love that you give to your plants in your garden is for anyone, perhaps one of the best ways to garden. I was thinking the other day, since I don't really do gardening myself other than pulling weeds. As I was pulling weeds out of the garden, I was thinking about what you said, and I was wondering, when I pull weeds out of the garden, I do recognize that I am taking a life. And I'm thinking about what Ra and Quo have both said about whether you're eating an animal or you're eating a plant, you're still taking the life and you're taking consciousness of that entity. And I was wondering, I'm assuming that you do some amount of weeding in your gardens. And I was wondering if and when you're pulling a weed and taking its life, do you have any practice thing that you say to the plant or anything that you say in acknowledgement of what you're doing there?
Not specifically for every weed, because there'd be thousands of conversations per day. When I get up in the morning and it's still dark out and I go outside to get the newspaper from the street, I stop and I thank all of the consciousnesses and the nature spirits for being with me in my yard and for sharing the love and light to create with me. And I thank them for their purpose, and whatever it might be. If it is to be in my garden, then I thank them for that. If it is to not be in my garden, I thank them for being there when they were. So it's fairly simple, and there's life everywhere, and we all work with that however we can. And nature spirits are aware, I do believe, that some things are more desirable in a garden than others, and that's life. Life lives on life. And even though the plant may not live again right now as a plant, it will go back into the ground as fertilizer, you might say, and help other life to grow and perhaps provide seeds for more of its own kind. So it's a cycle that's continuous, and we're all part of it.
That makes sense. Yeah, I appreciate your explaining that. I remember there were at least one or two sessions where Quo has referred to love as the force that creates and destroys, indicating that life and death are part of the full circle of being and life. Right. Yeah. Still learning how to work that out in my own gardening process.
The death is only temporary. The death is only temporary. It's always a transformation for every form of life to another existence. So no life ever really dies.
Indeed. Yeah, thank you. That is a good, powerful reminder. Did you have any other tips for anyone who might be doing their gardening at this point in terms of how you relate to plants, how you relate to nature spirits or anything like that?
I just try to, and would recommend other people try to make a relationship, an effort to communicate with the spirits and the plants that are in your yard from time to time as you're doing your work out there. Beginning of the work or the end of the work or anytime, in the middle of work, just take a moment and thank everybody for being there, for playing their part.
Yeah, I appreciate that. That is a beautiful reminder, especially in springtime. I do see a number of questions in the chat window, and we've got a number of folks here. It's such a blessing and a joy to see everyone here. I will for sure get to the questions, but there was one other question that I wanted to ask you, Jim, if you don't mind. And that was related to the most recent Zoomcast we did with Gary and Austin some weeks ago, earlier this month, I believe. We were talking a little bit about how it felt for them to channel the entity known as Quo. And I remember Gary and Austin both indicating that before every session, they usually feel kind of nervous before the channeling begins. But as they feel the presence there, they feel a stabilizing presence. I think they described it as a familial presence. A warm and fuzzy feeling. I believe Gary said that to him, the entity Latwii, it appears to him as sexy, I believe. We all were highly amused by it, yeah, for sure. And I believe you noted in your Camelot journal yesterday or today that Latwii and your vibrations somehow seem to be fairly close together. So I was just wondering about your own thoughts and feelings on what does it feel like to channel Quo? Maybe now, or how that has changed over the years or anything like that?
Well, for me, it feels like an old friend because we first started channeling Quo in 1986, 2 years after the raw contact was completed. And after channeling for, I guess, a couple of weeks, we finally thought, well, maybe we should ask Quo who they are. That's kind of an unusual name. So we did. And it turns out that Quo is not just one social memory complex. They are a collection of three and are a principle. And the first social memory complex is those of Haton, the fourth density of love. That was the first group that we channeled, or the Don and Carla channeled, back in 1961. And the second part of Quo is Latwii, the fifth density social memory complex that Don and Carla were channeling before the raw contact. And
Sorry, Jim, I had to mute everybody's mics. Had a little bit of background noise there. Might need to unmute your mic, Jim, and continue. And greetings, Morris. Welcome, glad you could join us. I'm sorry, Jim, would you mind picking up where you left off?
Okay. So the first social memory complex was Haton of love. The second social memory complex of Quo is Latwii, of the density of wisdom. And the third social memory complex is those of Ra of the sixth density. Now, Ra itself does not speak as a social memory complex. Usually the voice is given by those of Latwii when Quo is channeled. So this is what we finally got back in 1986, shortly after we started channeling those of Quo, to find out just exactly who they were. And Quo seems to be a very poetic type of combination of these social memory complexes that together they, especially when Carla would channel Quo, they were most poetic and inspiring. And so for me, Quo is an old friend. For Gary and Austin and Trish and the other lady in our group, Kathy Beck, they've been working very hard and diligently since 2017 for about 5 years now to channel those occult, and they're doing very well. And very likely this fall, we'll be able to go back to public meditations, and everybody in our group, the channeling group, will be invited to go to the public channelings, and each one would take a question there instead of doing it in our channeling circles that we have twice a month. So they're ready to graduate, in my opinion. A couple of them are a little nervous about that, but they'll get over that because they're doing very well.
Oh, that's so wonderful. Yeah, what a joy and what a blessing to hear. And for sure, our heartfelt thanks to all on the channeling team for all they do to be of service to others this way. It is a beautiful gift to humanity and not an easy undertaking for anyone, I'm sure. So yeah, old friend is a beautiful way to think of it. And I'm wondering, is there anything else you can share in terms of the sense that you get vibrationally from them? I think Gary said something to the effect that it felt really warm, like if they met, they would probably give him a big hug or anything like that. Is that,
Yeah.
do you have a similar sense or feel, or I would imagine it's different for different channels?
My feeling is just like I said, somebody I've known for a long time that has a special relationship with me, and that we're here to do our best, both of us, all of us, to be of service to the Creator that is in every entity that will be reading or hearing the channelings. So we're like a team, it's and they're probably the head coach.
It's a beautiful way to think about it. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Much appreciated. I have lots of follow-up questions. Could talk about this for another hour if we wanted to, but I do see a good number of questions in the chat window, and I know there's lots of people who would love to ask you some various questions on different topics. So if you don't mind, Josh, always a delight to have you here. And I do see you have a few questions. Would you like to start off with your first question? And maybe after we cycle through the rest of the group, we could come back to ask more.
Yeah, sure. Again, thank you, Jonathan, for putting this on, and thank you, Jim, for being here. The first three questions I typed are on behalf of Sue Wen. They're her questions. She couldn't be here today. So her first question is, when the group performs the LBRP, Lesser Banishing Ritual, the Pentagram, before the raw contact, do you all do it together, or did only Don do it for the group?
We all did it together in the living room, which gave us plenty of room to move about as a group. Because as you're probably familiar with the Banishing Ritual, you start off facing east, and then you turn to the south, then you turn to the west, and then you turn to the north, and then back to the east again. So we had to have a lot of room to be able to do that. And we did that also in the room that we had the raw contact. And that required a little more care because it was a much smaller room. So we tried to protect every room that we meditated in before the raw contact and the raw contact room itself. And Don would usually be the one that would be in the middle, Carl and I on each side, so that he would actually be making the gestures and saying the words, and we would be supporting by our mental repetition of the words and gestures ourselves.
Thank you.
Josh, I see the second question there seems like somewhat of a appropriate on the same subject. Would you like to ask Sue Wen's second question on her behalf?
Yes, thank you. So she asks, when you walk the circle of one before the contact, did the Carla always fall into trance at the end of it? Or was there any time that Carla couldn't get into trance to start the channeling?
As far as we knew, she would go into trance at some point during the walking of the circle of one. There was never a time when we were aware of her not being in trance. So that was something that we could depend on. The circle of one seemed to be a trigger or a subconscious and conscious reminder to her of why we were all there. And how she left her body, none of us, including her, ever really knew. It seemed to be something that was a gift, and it's something that was triggered by the walking of the circle of one, which Ra gave us to use as a protection for the room in which we had the Ra contact. So it was a given that by the time we were done with the circle of one walking, that she would be in trance and ready to proceed.
Was there any time she could not get into trance?
No, that never happened.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the question.
Josh, I did notice that you did have a follow-up question about the banishing ritual a little bit farther on. As long as we're on the subject, would you like to go ahead and ask that question?
Yes, thank you. So my own question is, Jim, can you or someone else from LNL perhaps post a video doing your version of the LBRP for others to watch?
Gary did film me doing the ritual. So I know it's available. If you send an email to contact@llresearch.org, that will get into Gary's hands. And he can either, it could be, I'm not sure, it might already be on our new website. So in that case, he would just tell you where to go to get it, or he would probably be able to just send it to you.
Great, thank you very much. I'll have to do it.
All right, thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Jim. And thank you, as always, Josh, for the great questions. And thank you, Sue-Wen, for the questions. I did notice that Ragnar had a question on a different subject that seems appropriate. I think something a lot of people have wondered about. Ragnar, would you like to ask your question?
Sure. Hi, Jim.
Hi, Ragnar.
It's a real privilege to be able to run stuff by you here. Thank you for that. So my thoughts today are on the use of psychedelic plants, which many people regard as an integral part of their spiritual journeys. I think for their apparent ability to help people move past a simple intellectual understanding of total unity towards a more, let's say, experiential, intuitive feeling of that reality, almost as if they're a means of thinning the veil to some degree, maybe. I don't know. Do you have any thoughts worth sharing on psychedelic plants as spiritual teachers?
Sure. I have a friend who is working now in a field which is developing to use psychedelic plants for therapy, and not just for, say, illuminating experiences. And it looks like it's a very good means of doing that, that people can discover more about themselves through the use of the psychedelic plants and be able afterwards to have a more balanced life and be cured of various kinds of difficulties. So I think that there's a great value in that regard. And I do know, I have another friend who had a natural spiritual awakening that occurred a number of years ago, but he still feels that it's helpful for him to join in other groups that are using various psychedelics to re-experience another level of that particular experience he had when he was actually in his office working as a lawyer, and it just hit him there all of a sudden. I think it's a personal thing for everybody to decide for him or herself. For myself, being one of the original members of the hippie revolution back in the 60s and 70s, I was very familiar with psychedelics. And I had an experience one night that I had just taken LSD, and I was walking around my neighborhood and seeing the sparkles in the air and the beauty and the light, and having a wonderful time. So I got back to my apartment and I laid down in my bed. And I heard a voice in my head, and it said, "You don't have to be stoned to be here." So at that point, I thought, well, that's a pretty important point. So I stopped taking LSD and psychedelics at that time. That's just my personal experience. Others have their own.
Fascinating. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you for your question.
Thank you also for asking the question, Josh. I seen that question come up in Law 1 study groups a number of times. So there's a lot of folks who've been curious about that. And Jim, thank you for sharing your personal experiences. Never heard that, but I think we all find a lot to learn from that. And perhaps on a similar note, I saw that Candy had a question that she wanted to ask that might be on a related topic. Candy, would you like to unmute your mic and ask?
Hi, thanks, Jonathan, and thanks, Jim, for having this session. My first time asking a question. This question came up in our study group this week over session 69, and it's not actually related to medical anesthetics or drugs that is in the question, but it was a reference to the fact that there was an episode where Carla had was close to being removed from her body in a in a trance, and there was this explanation given by Ra that this is a unique experience because the group is doing something for the purpose of service for others, service to others, and there is a danger when there is a will to leave the body. And so the reference given by Ra in the answer is that this is an attempt to be of service in this particular way, which is proceeding now. So we had a question of whether this is a reference to the unique situation of Carla, or is it generally possible for there to be this type of attack whenever there is a trance state in with the aim of service to others? So that's my question.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yes, the general principle here is that any group that is involved in service to others in an intense way that can actually produce light, which is the power of advancing consciousness, then the negatively oriented entities also have the right to attempt to be heard on their level of experience. And usually the way that plays out is that if people who are channeling and producing this light that can transform people's lives don't know that they need to challenge any entity that wishes to channel through them, every time they channel in that means or in that heart of their being, that is their spiritual journey, that for which they live and would gladly die if necessary. So this challenge needs to be made every time. Otherwise, the negatively oriented entities can take over the channel, beginning at the first time, mimicking the positive philosophy, and then slowly turning the channel away from the love and light of the Creator so that another light is put out. So it's very important, especially in the Ra contact, because Ra was giving us information that was very powerful. And there were a number of attempts made to remove Carla's spirit from her body so that they could gain her power by putting her into their negative time space. So the whole idea is that you need to be able to make a challenge every time you channel and have at least 2 other people in your group with you to help protect and purify the circle in order to avoid having that happen. And Ross suggested that because so many people do not do that, at least back in the early 80s, that most of the instruments and channels and groups would at some point find their information mixed. It would begin positive and then it would slowly be taken away. They would be subject to temptations to aggrandizement of the person, of the group, various other temptations. So that was the whole idea, is to be able to determine who you've got on the line, because as Carla said, it's a crowded universe. There's lots of people and entities out there that you don't want to talk to because they don't have your well-being in their hearts. So you need to know who you're talking to.
Thank you so much for your answer.
Well, thank you, Candy.
Did you have any follow-up questions to that, Candy?
I would like to know how to do the challenge if you're if you can share a bit more on that, Jim.
That is whenever we would have a new channeling circle begin, that was one of the first things that would be attempted, is to have everybody meditate on what it is they felt most drawn to in their spiritual lives, so that that could become the basis of their challenge. Now, for Carla, it wasn't a problem at all, because for her, she had experiences with Jesus Christ by the time she was 2 years old. That was very powerful for her. So she became a disciple of Jesus right away. So she would challenge in the name of Jesus Christ. When I, in 1982, was advised by those of Ra to find some way of challenging as well, I thought, well, I don't have that relationship right now with Jesus Christ, so maybe Christ consciousness, that which Christ exemplified, would be what I would challenge in. And so I did. Other people might want to challenge in the name of Buddha, or some other saint that is important to them, or a principle like service to others, or the open heart, whatever it is that really moves you and is your spiritual star that leads you on your journey, is what I would suggest. And as years have gone by and Carla passed away, I had my own experience with Jesus. So now I also challenge in the name of Jesus Christ. So that's just the way it's worked for me and for Carla. And it can, it's individual. People need to find out their own individual way.
Thank you. That's beautiful.
Well, thank you, Candy.
Thank you for the questions, Candy, and thank you, Jim, for sharing that. You're touching on things that I was going to save for a follow-up question for later, but I've really got to ask now since you're talking about everything we just shared. I noticed that you wrote about in your Camelot journal quite recently, maybe yesterday or the day before.
Right.
And this would be a great time to put in a plug for the Camelot journal. For folks who don't know, I believe it's accessible on the L&L Research website. I can't remember the link you used to get there. Maybe Jim, you can jump in if you remember how exactly to get
Well,
there.
I get there in a different way. I'm not sure how people really get there.
Go to llresearch.org, and I think you'll find it without too much effort. But it's in the Bring Forth link, and it is Jim's daily journaling where he shares passages from Ra and his own reflections on them with 40 plus years of hindsight. It's really beautiful stuff, and I read them every day, and I enjoy learning from them. And yes, you were talking specifically about the channeling process and how important that is.
Right.
And am I remembering correctly that part of the reason that you have chose to use Jesus as your channeling question is that when you challenge entity, that it is as if Jesus is there with you, so that when that entity that wants to speak through you has to say Jesus is Lord, Jesus is basically standing right there to make sure. Am I getting the gist of that correctly?
That's basically correct. And that would be correct for everybody. If you have an inspiring figure or concept that you're challenging, that is there with you. It is your protection. It's your shield and your buckler. And no negative oriented entity can't even begin to lie to that type of purity.
Well, and especially to Jesus. I would imagine they could lie to, your Aunt Bertha or somebody like that.
Depends on
lying
how
to Jesus is a little bit. And that was only the setup for the actual question that I wanted to ask. I ran across a passage from Quo not too long ago. I believe it was dated January 7th, 1990. And Quo at that point said, and I'm just going to have to read off my notes here, referring to Jesus, they said that Jesus wished to live a life that was a poem to the Creator. And again, on planet after planet, this entity comes into incarnation with the special character of partial remembrance. This entity was a good teacher of the message of the law of one. Again and again, the message is misunderstood. Again and again, the Creator sends forth that special part of itself, which retains the consciousness of unconditional love, rather than having it disappear beneath this veil. This entity has helped many, many civilizations. That is a really beautiful passage. And the idea that Jesus has been on many different planets, not just Earth, and has helped not many civilizations, but many, many civilizations. That's really a beautiful, powerful thing. Do you remember that session? Do you remember that teaching? And do you have any idea of what the manifestation of Christ consciousness or Jesus on other planets might look like?
I do not remember that quote. That is a beautiful quote, but I do know that Ross said that Jesus was a wanderer that was ready to graduate into fifth density, which means that he'd passed through the density of love and understanding and had, imbibed all of what could be had there in his own special way. And as a wanderer, I'm sure that he would continue to offer this service in many ways. I mean, the fourth density itself is 30 million years long. Our third density is only 75,000 years long. So he could get in quite a few incarnations on third density planets if he really wanted to. And I'm guessing he probably did, because Ross suggested that all wanderers have their special skills and abilities that they bring with them in order to be of service to others when they remember that they are a wanderer. And that's the trick. Is a lot of people are aware that, well, this planet just does not quite feel right. I'm not sure why I'm here. And it's not always easy to remember. It's not always easy to, live in harmony with these disharmonious vibrations. So to undergo the experience of the forgetting, all wanderers forget, just like every other third density entity does. To undergo that forgetting and then try to remember is a challenge. But if you can do it, it really polarizes your consciousness much more effectively than if you don't do it. So I have a hunch that Jesus is probably an old hand at that and has done a really good job. That would be my guess. I could be wrong.
Just what an amazing thing to contemplate, though. I mean,
yeah.
Given the prevalence of the cross and the 90-degree angles that we see in the archetypical mind and in the archetypes that we've seen, it just makes me wonder, wow, I wonder if when Jesus is on other planets, is there often crosses involved? Is he crucified like on other planets as well? Because they said, that again and again, the message is misunderstood. I'm wondering if that's part of his manifestation, that he has to sacrifice himself in the name of love. I wonder. Do you have any thoughts on that? Does that even make any sense to you?
I do have a couple of thoughts. There are a couple of books that I've read recently that kind of go more deeply into what Jesus's life might have been and what his relationship to Mary Magdalene might have been. So many of the male church hierarchy through the years have painted Mary Magdalene as a prostitute. But the Magdalene manuscript is a book that portrays her as being a member of the sex cult of Isis, of the Egyptian culture, where sex magic was practiced. And Ra mentions high sexual magic as a means which they used in third density on Venus to, propel their own evolution forward. The interrelationships, the sexual experiences and the sexual energy exchanges, and then piercing the veil and discovering more information about the archetypical mind in the tarot. And so that gives more of a layers of understanding or beingness, perhaps, of Jesus. Then again, there's another book very similar, the Magdalene manuscript. Megan Watterson's Mary Magdalene Revealed. And again, it said in there that Mary Magdalene and Jesus had a special relationship that was based on high sexual magic that helped him to survive the crucifixion. Now, I don't know if that's true, but the sources are quite impressive. The books are well written, and it's all very possible. There might be a lot more to both Jesus and Mary Magdalene than what we are led to believe through all these years of 2,000 years since his life here on Earth.
Indeed. And I know that's another thing that you've mentioned recently in the Camelot Journal, the study group that you're in, talking about that group. I have other follow-up questions I would love to ask on that. But I do believe there are other people in the group who have been waiting very patiently to ask some questions. Randy Moberg, I believe you had a question, something about ringing in the ears. Is that something you would like to ask? Would you like to unmute your mic and ask?
Yeah, thank you, Jonathan, and thank you, Jim, for this, and greetings to everybody here. I'm sure this is a common question. The ringing in the ears. I don't believe I have Meniere's disease, but I do have ringing in the ears, and I've had it for a couple of years, and it changes. The frequency changes. You'd be sharp, different things. Anyway, is there any new information that you're aware of about ringing in the ears, and is it a download, or how should we picture this? Anything, thoughts on that?
Well, basically, when Don asked Ra about the ringing in his ears, Ra suggested that the right ear ringing was a positive affirmation, usually from one of your guides, as to whatever you were doing at that time is the thing you need to be doing. If it's a ringing in the left ear, it's a suggestion from your guide that whatever you're doing or thinking about doing at that time would probably not be a good idea. So it's inner guidance. And one way the inner guidance can be experienced by anybody who is open to such things. So that was basically it. Do you have a follow-up to that? Or?
No, that's I just had somewhere that I thought I read that, and I don't know if it was L&L stuff that was just specifically to Don, and that may be different for other people. But if that's all there is, then that makes sense to me.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks for the question, Randy. Great to see you here. I noticed that Brian had a couple questions that he wanted to ask. Brian, would you like to unmute your mic and ask at least your first question?
Absolutely. Thank you for this opportunity to be here. Very nice to meet you all, and very nice to meet you, Jim. I'll just say real quick, my fiance has been a Law of One scholar, as she calls herself, for many years now. She's actually writing a book right now, largely based on the material. And yeah, and she introduced me to at least the studying of it. And I've been studying it pretty intensely for the last few years too. Just really excited to be here. So I actually wanted to switch a little directions with my questions, because I was really intrigued with the conversation that we were having based on Candy's question. I was wondering if I could just actually ask a follow-up to that, because Jim, I wrote a post recently about, I've been seeing, and I use really strong terminology, but I really feel like it's warranted. I've been seeing what I call a level of like paranoid schizophrenia going through some of the spiritual community based on certain like stories and narratives that, trace back to what I feel are probably, higher density, darker beings kind of creating these stories that, go through the collective. And really it's just like, it's this notion about like, the dark agenda, like the dark ETs, the dark agenda, and really posturing them in a way that makes them feel really powerful. Like they just came sweeping into this universe and into our solar system and just, guns blazing, took things over, imprisoned the planet. Like, and this is like a growing kind of like idea about like why things are bad on the planet. And I'm just wondering if you could, continuing on that conversation that we were kind of talking about with Candy, like what would you say, how do you view, or how would you like kind of paraphrase like what Ross says about what happened to humanity in order to kind of let the darkness in on on a global scale? Like what was that process? Because from what I get from the materials, that essentially it was by permission to some level. Like at some point we were probably given a temptation and we kind of took that temptation, and that kind of led us astray versus, they just burst through the quarantine and started wreaking havoc. So I'm just curious what your thoughts are on that.
Well, Ross suggested the basic technique of the negatively oriented entities is to find an elite, a group of people that will take their philosophy to heart, however they present it to them, whatever the story is. And as they take this to heart and they spread it around the world, they attempt to have more and more people join in this narrative so that people are basing their lives on fear and what could happen or what is happening. And what that does is two things at least. It takes them away from the positive path of their spiritual journey and introduces the concept of fear. And that is something that tends to separate us from each other so that people look at each other in a fearful way. Maybe you're part of that dark plan, or maybe you got something up your sleeve that I don't know about. Maybe I shouldn't trust you. And all of that separates us. And what Ross suggested, and Don was also getting information about that, was that we need to remember our positive path, that we are all here together, working as a group to find more spiritual enlightenment in our own hearts and share it with each other. That we don't need to be concerned about what Ra called the planetary game. And that's what Ra looked at this narrative, this dark narrative as. The planetary game. He said, it's not central to the harvest unless you make it so. And then you are taking yourself off the game board, you might say, and becoming a slave to this thought, to this narrative, to this idea that there is something to fear. If we can see each other as the creator and realize that you and I and everybody else are our other selves, which is the way Ra described everybody. We are all one. That's the law of one. And there's no reason to fear anything. And we have all of the power in the world in our hearts because love is the power that created the entire creation. You can dissolve any fear with love. And that's Ra's suggestion. And that's what we always tried to do.
I love that. That was really beautiful. Thank you for that response.
Well, thank you for the question. I appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Ryan, that was a really beautiful question. I really appreciate your asking that. Do you have any follow-ups to that you would like to ask?
Maybe just a quick one. You know, if Jim, if you, you know, what would you say to people? Because I again, like, you know, I'm really in the community of like truthers and people trying to get to the truth and expose the lies and expose the darkness. And so I think you said it, but, you know, is there anything else that you would say to folks who feel like we have to expose all the dark agenda underpinnings of what's happening in the world in order for us to like unite as a human species? Like, because I know that I have a fair amount of people in my network that just feel like they have to be like on it, just trying to, you know, yeah, just expose those lies wherever they see them because they feel like that's like, you know, the most efficient way this is going to happen. I'm just wondering if you have any other words in that regard for those who are concerned about the dark agenda, and especially those who feel like it's, you know, in high gear right now. You know, what would you say to them just to kind of give them an understanding of where their power really lies? And I think, again, I think you already said it, but if there's anything else you might want to say on that, I would love to hear it.
Before I joined Don and Carla in 1980, I spent a good deal of the 1970s as a conspiracy buff myself. And I was getting all the information I could about everything that was happening behind the scenes. Mm-hmm. I had all kinds of sources of information. I was in my little community in central Kentucky, and I was telling everybody about what was happening, what was going on. You know, we need to do something about this. And then finally, it hit me one day. Said, you know, I'm spending so much time investigating conspiracy theories. I'm not pursuing my own spiritual path. Mm-hmm. And it's hurting my own progress. And even if these theories were true, there's not a thing you can do about it. Why don't you just be a spiritual journey seeker of truth and not worry about all that? And that's worked for me for all these years. I know people are always going to be doing that. there's something very attractive about having the truth. I got the truth and nobody else has got the truth that I've got. This is what I got to say here. But, it's not going to get you anywhere. It's going to regress your progress. So that's my own journey. And that's what I would recommend to others. Be as pure a seeker as possible. Serve others in a loving way, not in a way that plants fear. Those seeds of fear can grow oh so easily. Because we exist in this third density illusion with a veil between our conscious and subconscious minds. And it's easy to be fooled. And that's one of the ways the negative entities do it. So don't be fooled. Love is the way. It is the only way. It is the most powerful way. If you want power, love.
Awesome. Beautiful. Thank you so much, Jim. Really appreciate that. Yeah. So just real quick, my fiance has a podcast. She hosts part-time. It's got a lot of followers. It's called the Positive Head Podcast. I don't know if you are open to being interviewed on something like that, but if you are, is there a way that she can reach out to you?
Sure. contact@llresearch.org.
Okay.
That will get her to Gary, and he will transmit the request to me, and I'll respond.
Beautiful. All right. Thank you again. And
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you everyone for being here.
Brian, thank you so much for the wonderful questions. And Jim, thank you so much for the beautiful, heartfelt responses. Much to learn, much to grow on. Always appreciate these. I believe we have gone all the way through our first group of questions. So I am going to cycle back to Josh. And if I missed anyone who has not asked a question yet, please let me know, do the raised hand thing or something. Otherwise, Josh, did you want to ask another question from Sue-Wen or from yourself, or both?
Thank you very much. I'll finish up with Sue-Wen's last question. She asks, in some sessions, Ra said Carla's physical energy was completely depleted. She used transferred energy. I assume it's mostly from you, Jim. Did you feel anything before or afterward the session of the effect of transferring energy to Carla? If so, what are the effects?
Well, when we finally discovered that sexual energy transfers were an aid to the raw contact by allowing Carla to have more vital energy to use, the sessions were longer and we had more chance to get more information that way. So we felt it was a very sacred act to dedicate our lovemaking to the one infinite creator in general and the raw contact specifically. So when we did that, we were able to double the amount of energy that we created and further facilitate the raw contact. We felt as a result, it was a very sacred honor that we were participating in. And we thought that it was something that added so much dimension to sexuality that we had never before been aware of. That most of the time in our culture, sexuality is kind of, it's used to sell so many things. It's used to shame people. It's used to control people. And it's got such a dirty background to it. And we thought, it's so good to know what it's really like and what it's really for and how anybody can do this. They can dedicate their lovemaking with their partner to somehow serving the one infinite creator and become more purified seekers of truth that way. So we felt most enlightened by it, and most inspired. And it really was a blessing for the raw contact as well.
So when Ross says transferred energy, he's referring to the sexual energy. Is that correct?
Right. In the transfer of energy, the male transfers physical energy to the female, which Carla was short of, because the male has more physical energy than the female. The female transfers to the male the mental, emotional, and spiritual energy, which the male by nature has less of than the female. So that transfer aids both. It specifically aided Carla with her low physical energy, but also enhanced her vital energy, which is the combination of the energy of mind, body, and spirit, used in a spiritual fashion.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you for the question.
And Jim, am I remembering correctly that the first session that you realized the value of sexual energy transfer going on was session 69?
No. Good joke. It was actually session 16. If you look at session 16, I think there are 62 questions in it. That was the longest session ever. So after we discovered, you said, no, we asked ourselves, why in the world was that so long? And we thought, well, maybe it has something to do with, a sexual energy exchange beforehand. Because Ra didn't tell us that that was the deal. We always had to figure all these things out for ourselves, because Ra said our free will was of paramount importance in the Ra contact. They couldn't just tell us, well, you do this, you do that, you do this, and it's going to be okay. We had to figure it out. We had to figure out what they meant when they were saying the instrument is 0.2 degrees out of alignment of perpendicularity. And we thought, now, there's no way we can move Carla 0.2 of a degree. This has to be a code. This has to be something else to it. And so when they would say something like that, we finally figured out they were talking not about the alignment of the instrument or the candle or the incense or any of that. They were talking about our line of questioning. If we had gotten into transient material that was not valuable now and 10,000 years from now, if we were talking about things that didn't have that kind of staying power and were not involved in the evolution of mind, body, and spirit, then that was off the line of questioning. And if we stayed there too long, we would lose the Ra contact. We finally figured that out too. Finally, Rob mentioned that. And so, we had to figure stuff like that out and wend our way through the confusion, as I think they put it.
Thank you for sharing that. And I was not making a crass joke on behalf of my high school students. I seem to remember from our past session that you had said that it was after session 68, I believe, that you realized, or that you started exchanging sexual energy before every session after that.
Right, yeah.
I believe it would be starting with session 69.
Okay. Yeah, I believe it was 68 that it was finally decided that we really could not have a session unless there was an energy transfer. But we knew beforehand, way beforehand, that it really helped. But we didn't always do that until session 69.
In case anyone needed proof that Creator has a wonderful sense of humor. Yes, indeed. Thank you so much for sharing that. Brian, I see you had your hand up. Did you want to ask a follow-up question or clarification?
Yeah, I just, my original question, I realized also there was someone in the, I think the event that asked something similar. So I figured I would just ask it since might apply to a few people. But so I'm a sound healing practitioner and am been really seeking to meld elements of the Law of One and LML's research with that knowledge. And I'm just curious, I know that Carla has this awesome quote in Living the Law of One around sacred sounds. And I know that Ra talks a little bit about things like Sanskrit mantra. And I'm just curious if there's anything that comes to mind off the top of your head, or if there's any way, any sessions that or a way to even search, how to use sound for the spiritual seeker, like in a way for either healing or the evolution of consciousness. Anything that comes to mind that you might suggest to people to integrate?
Not specifically. I do know what Ross said about the Sanskrit and the Hebrew words and vowels being important, because if you could vibrate them correctly, it was as if the creation sang within you. So I would suggest studying those and trying to figure out how to vibrate them in a way that has meaning for you. I would also guess that there's probably the most efficient way somewhere, but I think there's probably a range of potential how a person such as yourself could find a vibration that would be helpful. Each type of healer needs to work in some degree with helping to penetrate what Ra called the red-violet shield of protection that surrounds an entity and holds in place whatever degree of illness slash health is in that person, whatever needs to be healed. Then if you could interrupt that for just a moment, then maybe you could do it with sound, I don't know. Then the healer has done the work of giving the one to be healed a chance to heal itself, so that that red-violet shield then could be reintegrated and hold a new level of health in place, just as the old level of disease was held in place. So I guess that would be an area of personal investigation that you would need to undertake. And I think that the desire to be of service to others that I see obviously in you could probably be your best friend there, and continue to try to figure out what that is. But Don asked Ra, well, how could you tell us how to say that note, how to sing that note? Says Ra, no. So we got to figure it out ourselves.
Awesome. Yeah, that's great. Perfect. Thank you. Mhm.
Darn that free will thing again. Goodness.
Right.
Thanks so much for the questions, Brian. We are approaching the end of our hour, and I know Josh has been asking questions on Sue Wen's behalf, and I know Josh had at least one or two other questions that he wanted to ask for himself. Wanted to make sure that he had a chance to do that. Otherwise, I think Ragnar perhaps had a follow-up question, and then that's kind of all I'm seeing in the chat window. So if anybody else had questions they wanted to ask, now would be a great time to put it in the window. Otherwise, Josh, would you like to ask one or both of your remaining questions?
I would, but I believe Ellie has a question. She's been waving her hand a lot.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Thank you for being thoughtful, Josh. Ellie, would you like to unmute your mic and ask?
Yes, I'm sorry that I'm late. I had cats to feed. My question is, I read in one of Carla, I'm reading her book, and that you suggested, and she says that for meditation purposes, to begin the meditation by saying, I desire to, I have it written right. I desire to know in order to serve. I desire to use my subconscious mind to enrich, enliven, enable, and engage this third density, mind and heart, and then raising the chakras. Well, I thought I heard somewhere that she had alluded to, or Ra had alluded to, tuning forks. I am also a sound healer, and I thought using my tuning fork on my third eye and my heart center and my crown, and to, I just thought if you had any knowledge, information on this.
I don't have any knowledge on it, but it sounds like a good idea to me. Number one, I think Carla's talking about setting an intention. And if you set your intention to do that, then there's much more chance that that's going to happen. So I'd say do it.
That's a great question, Ellie. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Question to that? Did you have a follow-up question?
No, when are we going to see you next time?
Next month, probably the last Saturday of the month.
Okay, look forward to it.
Well, I look forward to seeing you again, Allie. And
Thank
take
you.
care of those kitty cats. I know what you're doing.
Okay, I will. I'm going to a sweat lodge now.
Oh, good, good.
Yeah.
Ellie, for the record, I do remember reading a Quo channeling session where somebody was asking about tuning forks and the heart chakra in particular, because somebody was using one. And I think Quo had suggested something to the effect of the frequency of F above middle C or something like that. And definitely something that caught my attention too. So yeah, I would encourage you to pursue that. Thanks again for asking the question. And Josh, in our remaining time, did you want to, is there anyone else I missed? If not, Josh, did you want to ask one or both of your questions?
Yes, thank you very much. I'll try and be quick. Real quick, has LNL or can they share video or audio of the conscious channeling sessions? I'd love to hear what that sounds like.
We don't video our sessions, so we don't have anything to share. Nobody's ever asked us before. You're the first.
Or audio.
Well, see, audio. I think check our new website. They may be on there. I might be wrong there. I think that was the intention. There's still some upgrades we need to make that haven't been made to the new website. So again, you can write that same address, contact@lresearch.org, to find out if that's going to happen or has already happened.
Thank you. And then the last two are kind of the same, sort of related. Has Quo said that the quarantine is now lifted? And has the Confederation said there will be open contact with ETs here on Earth in the next, say, 30 years or so?
To my knowledge, the quarantine is still in effect. I have not heard any information otherwise.
So that would then mean no contact until it's lifted.
Oh, really? Well, I didn't know that was who did. I don't know where that came from.
Well, I guess I'm saying if the quarantine's in effect, that prevents ETs from making a major interaction with our
Right.
population.
Right.
Right.
They're only for those who have eyes to see. And usually, well, I don't know these days about ET experiences. I don't know if there's a lot of them going on. Usually people are getting types of experiences in their meditations or dreams that would serve the same purpose in a positive sense.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you again.
Great questions, as always, Josh. Thank you. So just for clarification, Jim, am I understanding correctly? Because I believe I've seen Ross say this, that generally Confederation entities do not appear in our skies in UFO
Right.
form.
Most of the entities you see in the skies are not positively oriented.
Yeah, good, certainly thing to bear in mind as we hear about disclosures and secret space programs and all that kind of stuff that we generally don't talk about in these Zoomcasts. I believe, Ragnar, did you still have a follow-up question that you wanted to ask, or are we kind of past that point?
Oh, yeah, I could throw it out real quick if that's cool. Thank you. I just wanted to circle back 1 second on the personal experience that you shared, wherein you had ingested the LSD, you were enjoying the expanded state of consciousness, you were visually perceiving the fabric of reality to some degree, as it were, and then the voice came to you and stated, you don't need to be stoned to be here, and you stopped forever. So that's the you don't need to be stoned to be here is a sentiment I've heard expressed many times, and I've always felt there's some kind of implication there that reaching those expanded states of consciousness by convening with plants versus by yourself is somehow less valid or less desirable. So I'm wondering if you would agree with that, and also, were you ever able to return to that place that the voice told you that you didn't need the LSD to be there with, strictly through meditation alone or by any other means?
I'm on my path of returning to that place. It's a slow journey, but I value that journey because it's all natural. It's all me. It's all what I am here to do, in my opinion. Other people may have other ways of approaching it. See, what was the first part of your question? You asked the personal and then you asked the general part there.
The implication from what that voice said and other sentiments I've heard similarly, that reaching those expanded states of consciousness by convening with a plant is less desirable or less valid than doing it strictly through meditation or something to that effect.
I think Rod made the analogy of using the plant to get somewhere as hitchhiking on the road. And maybe you get picked up by a plant or a ride for a while, but then you're subject to the vagaries of the road and the conversation of the person and where they're going. And whereas if you get there by yourself, it's all your own journey, and it is not dependent upon any other outside force. And because of that, it has an opportunity to be more powerful. And that would be my interpretation of what Ra had to say. Like I said, I could be wrong, but that's my own personal opinion too. So,
Excellent. Thank you.
thank you again, Ragnar.
Great questions as always, Ragnar. Much appreciate your asking. And Jim, thanks again for the wonderful answers. Would it be safe to say that everyone's journey is unique to them, and what applies to one person is not necessarily the best for others?
Absolutely true. One of the words that I appreciate most in Raw Contact, and they say it again and again, is unique. Each of us is unique. There is no other person in the creation like you. Your journey is unique. It may fall within certain boundaries or guidelines, just like Ross said, for interpreting the archetypical mind. You know, every person has to determine it for him or herself. That's just the way it works. Because I like the idea of being unique. You know, I mean, an infinity of unique beings, and that is amazing. Infinity, it never ends, and we all have our own way. We share certain things with other people. We share what we look like in general, 2 eyes, you know, 2 legs and arms and things, but how many varieties, the infinite variety of people you can get out of that simple similarity. So yeah, unique. We're unique. Everybody's unique. And it's so good to talk to so many people that are absolutely unique. I appreciate it.
In a good way, yeah.
Oh yeah. Oh,
I seem to remember Ross saying something to the effect that when you begin to understand infinity, that's when you begin to understand the law of one. I'm paraphrasing, hopefully I'm doing it justice.
Yeah.
Jim, I wanted to thank you so much for being here. We are more or less at the end of our hour. And before we part ways for this time, I wanted to ask you, Jim, one more time, if you just have any closing thoughts or anything that you wanted to share before we part ways.
Well, you know, it's gatherings like this that are always so inspiring for everybody involved, including me, because I get to meet people that are amazing. I mean, the lives you lead and the way you express your questions show me that you have a grasp of the law of one. You've got a grasp of your spiritual journey, and that's what brings us all together. We're all here seeking to know more of the one creator that exists in all beings and how to find that creator within ourselves. And we help each other do it when we get together with little sessions like this. You know, that's the real value.
Thank you so much, my friend. We love you so much, and we thank you for all you have done and all you continue to do in service to others. Blessings to you, blessings to all our friends at L&L Research, blessings to all who joined us on the Zoomcast today, and blessings to all who are watching this on YouTube at some other space and time. In the love and light of the one infinite creator. Good thanks to all. Adonai.
Love and light to you all. Love you all.
Love you.